individual. Hello and welcome to the Ayurvedic Association of Canada. I just have to start a little bit over. I forgot to put the record button on. So my name's Erica Mueller and I'm from Okanagan Ayurveda in Kelowna, British Columbia, and I'm a director of the Ayurvedic Association of Canada. And I welcome you to a really exciting series that I think you're going to enjoy.
Hello.
One of the things, could you, can you ask him to, can you mute him or whoever's
Yes.
talking?
Done.
Mute him, thank you. One of the things I find really interesting about getting to know Dr. Carton is, I first met him at Kerala Ayurveda, and now he has his own company. But the one thing I find really interesting about all of Ayurveda is there's so much stuff on the internet that isn't actually true. And so I think it's really interesting and really well suited that Dr. Carton will talk about the Tridosic Theory and all the basics of Ayurveda, so that all of our members and anybody who's joined this evening can get a really clear understanding of Ayurveda. There's many people in North America that aren't using ancient texts to be able to tell you about Ayurveda or how the Tridosic theory works or how the universe works. And if you're going to study Ayurveda or learn more about Ayurveda, it's important to be able to use someone that does understand the ancient texts, and Dr. Carton's very good at that. And also, welcome for anybody who's joined us. We are a nonprofit organization, so I would really appreciate it if you'd be interested in joining us in some way in a membership capacity so we can grow Ayurveda. COVID has kind of put a little damper on the whole thing in the last year and a half, but we're hoping to, that's going to, find its place in the universe, and that we will be able to start having conferences again and doing other things. And if you are a practitioner, I'd just like to let you know that the fourth webinar that Dr. Carton's going to do is going to be more directed at practitioners. So if you are interested in getting some specific questions answered as a practitioner, we'll put a piece up on Facebook, and you can go there and just kind of put your questions in there, and we'll pick as many as we can pick for the hour. And Dr. Carton will be able to go through some of that, and we'll have a little bit of a question and answer. So it'll be really good for practitioners in Canada to be able to do that. So Dr. Carton, I'm just going to introduce you, and it's time to start. It's 1 minute after 4. So Dr. Carton, as I got to know him, has some really interesting stories about how he began in Ayurveda. He first studied with his guru, and like all gurus, you start at the basement and slowly you can work your way up, and we're not used to that in North America. So I really appreciated Dr. Carton's stories. He has a Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery. I met him, as I said, when he was doing research and clinical work for Kerala Ayurveda. And now he owns his own business with Ayurvedic programs for beginners and practitioners and some products. He also did his clinical internship at the National Research Institute of Pancha, which Pancha, if you don't know what it is a very interesting part of the whole Ayurvedic world. It's a complete cleansing program. He also got recognized for his protocols in diabetes, which is a pretty important thing to get recognized in India in the world of Ayurveda. So today we're going to start with a deep dive into the Tridosic Theory. In 2 weeks, we'll do the universe and the Tridosic principles. And in the 2 weeks after that, we will do Agni. So please join us for all of the pieces. And so Dr. Carton, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erica. So I hope all are able to see me and hear me. Yeah. So thank you, Erica, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for having me here. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
So why don't we just begin by this session by chanting the Ashtanga Hridayam itself, the Mangala Sloka of Vakpada. Okay, so please join me in chanting the Mangala Sloka of Vakpada. Okay, sit straight and here we go. Ragadirogan satatanushaktan asheshakaya prasritana sheshan autsukya moharatitan jakhana yo apurva vaidyaya namostu tasmai. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Jai Ho, Ayurveda.
So
Just hang on one moment, Dr. Carden. Can I please
Yes,
turn your videos off and your sound off until we're finished? And then when we're asking questions, you can turn it back on. And if you'd like to put in the chat where you're from, welcome, Victoria. Please do. Sorry, Dr. Carden.
no worries. Thank you very much. So I would really have to appreciate the Ayurveda Association of Canada, because these are the times where you can find anything about Ayurveda in the internet, right? If you want to learn about the Tridosic Theory or even advanced clinical concept, whatever it be, you can actually find them on internet. So why we should actually come together to study so basic as a Tridosha principle from the root text. So I always believe the more you read, the more meanings, the more dimensions you get to explore about Ayurveda. And this is particularly true. Now, I have a very wonderful story from my grandfather, actually, who used to believe that every word has a soul. Now, don't ask me if this is true or not, but old people, old beliefs. But anyway, I believed him. So he used to say to me that every word that we put down on a paper has an intention, has a soul. That is because when I write something that is my own, I put my energy into it, and that word has its own energy, its own soul. So he used to say, if you read through that word 1,000 times, right, you read through it again and again and again, what happens is that at the end, the soul of the word would release and it would come to you, so that you would get the actual meaning, what the author meant. So it only makes sense to read and reread and read again, so that you understand the actual principles of Ayurveda. So if you look at Ayurveda, which was originated 5,000 years ago in a culture which we don't know much about right now, it's going to be difficult to understand, even for me, because I was trained in modern medicine, in a modern scientific thinking, and coming to Ayurveda was quite a change for me too. So the only way that we can actually understand the essence of Ayurveda is by actually reading through these texts. And therefore, I have to really appreciate the organizers of this webinar series, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. With that, let's get into the deep dive. Okay, so the series is named as a deep dive, but in truth, before we do the deep dive, we need to know certain premises. We need to know certain basics. Even I don't know if there are any scuba divers in here, but even if there are some divers or swimmers, you would know before you venture out into water, you would know what is the depth of the water, where you're going, what is the temperature. You get to know a lot of details, right? So that's exactly what we are going to do today. And we are going to understand where we are going to go, what we are going to do today. So let me start with a personal story of mine before we go to the actual Tridosha principle. See, to me, when I was growing up, when I was in the school, my toughest subject was mathematics, especially the trigonometry, right? I don't know if any of you find trigonometry very hard, but I found trigonometry quite hard to comprehend. I was very much struggling with trigonometry until I got a great class teacher at my grade 8. So her name was Lalita, and her basic stream was science. So she understood that I was struggling with trigonometry, and she started talking to me about trigonometry every day. So what she told me actually flipped a coin for me, because what she told me was about the story of trigonometry. If you would know, trigonometry actually evolved. It originated in the ancient Egypt, right? Because they had to measure the height of the pyramid and do all the architectural wonders. So trigonometry originated in ancient Greek, but it then crossed the Mediterranean and it went to the ancient Greek. And the ancient Greek actually used it for astronomy, right? They used it for astronomy. And from them, it actually went on to India. Around 4th century, there was this mathematician in India whose name was Aryabhatta, who actually then wrote a textbook, his masterpiece called Aryabhattiyam, which actually had some astonishing discoveries about trigonometry. He was the one who actually presented the sine theta, the cos theta, etc. Right? His Sanskrit name for sine theta was Jya, and of cos theta was Kojya, which was later mistranslated, and that's how the sine and cos name emerged. And he used this trigonometry to understand the planetary motions. He used trigonometry to understand the value of pi. And he also understood through trigonometry that the planets are revolving actually around the sun in 4th century AD, and moon is just reflecting light of the sun. See, all this knowledge actually changed something in me about trigonometry, because I was getting something quite interesting. I was getting the evolutionary history of the trigonometry, and that kind of gave me a kind of perspective about trigonometry. So that evolutionary history of how trigonometry traveled from the pyramids to the planets, from Egypt to the Greece, and from Greece to India, and through Aryabhatta and to the planets, actually gave me an idea about how to look at trigonometry and its applications. Now, there is not much similar between trigonometry and Tridosha principle. Maybe rather both of them have 3 pointers, right? Trigonometry is the study of triangles, got 3 sides, and Tridosha has 3 doshas. Other than that, I don't think there is anything similar. And unlike trigonometry, I would say, fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have much of the evolutionary history of Tridosha principle available, right? Because if you look at the earliest works in Ayurveda, all of them are well organized. So let me share my screen and show you something interesting. Okay, here we go. I hope you're able to see my screen. Okay. So if you have read through Ashtanga Hridayam, which is one of the basic texts of Ayurveda, right? The text itself says Ayurveda was remembered by Lord Brahma. Now, this could be really because of the religious beliefs of the era in which Ayurveda or this textbook was written. But again, this was considered as received as a complete science. No textbook of Ayurveda in that manner talks about the evolution of Ayurveda, right? It always is understood as a complete science, as received as a complete medical science. It's very difficult to find the differences between even textbooks written in various eras. If you look at textbooks of Ayurveda, right, you'll find Susruta Samhita, which was somewhere close to 6th century BC. You'll find Charaka Samhita, 4th century AD. You'll find the Ashtanga, which was just gotten from, which is 7th century AD by Vapada. The problem with that is all of these textbooks are heavily edited, right? Heavily modified, that you're not able to understand the layers of time which have passed through these textbooks. Even if you look at the Charak Samhita, which is one of the oldest textbooks, it is actually derived from another textbook called Agnivesh Samhita, which is not available today. So we don't know what was in it, at least. We only know that Charaka redacted and what he edited out and what we have today as Charaka Samhita. Even that, some of the original portions are still missing. So the problem which we are presented to is because we lack that evolutionary history of the Tridosha principle. Therefore, there is a challenge in understanding the perspective in which the Tridosha principle was developed. At the best, what we can have is some speculations and some conjectures. Therefore, the talk today that we are going to do today, we are going to have two parts. We are going to speculate how the Tridosha principle emerged and why was it emerged, and what was the foundation from which the Tridosha principle emerged, and how it is presented in the classics. What are the data which is available with us in the classics about the Tridosha principle? This is what we are going to talk today. So if you look at the evolution of the Tridosha principle, you need to understand the basic sciences from which this evolution happened. So as I told you, the modern medical science, it emerged from the biology, the study of botany, much from physics, also from chemistry, right? So what was the basic foundations from which Ayurveda was developed? If you look at it, the basic sciences of the Orient prior to the Vedas or close to the Vedas were certain darshanas, were certain philosophies. There was Sankhya, there was Vaisheshika, there was Nyaya. Then there are also other philosophies such as Yoga, Charvaka, Bauddha, which is of the Buddha, Jainism, which is of the Mahavira. All these philosophies have contributed hugely to Ayurveda, but I would say a big chunk or the foundation has been provided by the Sankhya, Nyaya, and Vaisheshika. And what do they have in common with Ayurveda? So that's something which we're going to explore. So think along with me, if you are somebody who is going to live, let's say 5,000 years ago, a human who was living 5,000 years ago, and you have been thinking the eternal question, why do you exist? And what is the meaning of the world? What is the purpose of existence? And how the existence actually interact with you, actually engage with you. And the more important question, which is pertaining to medical science, how do we fall ill and how do we find health, right? So if you think along those lines, quite philosophical, you would agree, the Sankhya, Nyaya, and the Vaisheshika all have tried to answer these questions. So if you think along those lines, if you think from just logic and nothing else, because at that time, we don't have any other tools than the mind itself. So if you think about the times 5,000 years ago, when man was just beginning to step into civilization, about how he evolved in medical science, he must have thought about the forces which is actually acting upon his health, right? So he might have observed the place he lives in, the climate that he is exposed to, the place he lives by. All of these natural forces, these natural elements exert some kind of effect into his life, into his health. But how do you measure this? This is something which is also known to us, right? Because the seasons, the food that we eat, the kind of water we drink, the air we breathe in, all affects our health. They can either contribute positively or they can either contribute negatively. They can be favorable, they can be unfavorable. But how do we understand the language with which these forces interact with us? So this was the question, this was the basic question, which even the Nyaya, Sankhya, Vaisheshika, and Ayurveda in particular try to answer, which is, how do the seasons, the climate conditions, day and night, the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the geography we live in affect us? So if you have to imagine that you're living in some place cold, the ancient human observed that if you're living somewhere cold, there are certain properties of the cold climate which actually affect your body. For example, you feel cold, you feel frozen, right? Or if you're living in an arid place, in a summer, you feel warm, you're always sweaty. So the humans observed that these elements of nature actually exert some kind of qualities to your body. They exert some kind of effect. And how do you understand this effect? The effect is actually in tune with the qualities that these natural forces has, right? If it's a cold climate, we also feel cold. If it's a hot climate, we also feel hot. And he understood that this idea of quality can be applied to everything else. For example, if you're eating a heavy meal, you feel heavy, right? And if you drink a light, warm tea afterwards, you also feel light. It can make you light. So the quality of the substance that you consume apply a quality to your body, and that quality is doing certain functions inside the body. It's also applicable to the place you live in. If you live in a very arid place without much water, dry land, that dryness will also affect your body. But if you live in a place which is always cold, snow, that cold and that unctuousness, that dampness also affect your body. So a quality, exerting a quality in your body, and that manifesting a function, manifesting an effect, right? So thus emerged the cause and effect theory. There is a cause which produces an effect. And in this case, the cause is the natural forces which exert a quality in your body, and that quality manifesting an effect, which is the effect, right? So there is cause and effect. This famous philosophy in the ancient philosophies of Nyaya, Sankhya, and Vaisheshika is called the Karya Karana Siddhanta. So we are going to actually get familiar with many of Sanskrit terms today. So this is one of them. Karya Karana Siddhanta. Siddhanta is a theorem. It differs from a theory because a theorem is something which is already proven, something which you can actually experience, something it's already proven and you know what would happen. So a cause and effect theorem is kind of a Siddhanta. Siddhanta is a theorem. So Karya Karana Siddhanta. So that means there is a reason for every effect. And in this case, the Karya Karana Siddhanta was the natural forces has certain quality which affects the quality of our body, resulting in certain manifestation, resulting in certain functions. So thus, when it actually came into Ayurveda, when Ayurveda actually adopted this Karya Karana Siddhanta, it gave a very definite name to it, which we call the Guna Karma Siddhanta, right? The Guna Karma Siddhanta. There are certain qualities which actually does certain functions. Therefore, the natural forces around us exert certain qualities. Those qualities affect our quality and the function changes. It can change for good or it can change for bad. So quality, function. So to actually summarize that, the ancients understood that the elements of nature we interact with, the food we eat, the water we drink, it could be anything that we can imagine under the sun, even the sun, affect our health through qualities. All these factors have certain qualities and they interact with how our body functions. And depending on the nature of these qualities, these factors, if they are favorable, can actually make us healthy. And if they are not favorable, can make us ill, right? So we understand qualities. These qualities are the common language between us and the nature. Now, definitely we are a part of nature. Even the ancient philosophies understood that we are a part of nature. But to understand how the exterior elements interact with the interior us, which is we are also a part of the macrocosm, that microcosm that we are, how that the elements of the macrocosm interact with the microcosm that we are, we need to develop a consciousness. We need to develop an aham bodham. That's what we call in Sanskrit, the feeling of self-consciousness, self-awareness. So we understood through that self-awareness that it is through these qualities that the forces of the nature, the elements of the nature, or anything that we engage in nature interact with us. So qualities / gunas in Sanskrit are or is the common language through which we interact with everything else, right? So it becomes all the more easy, right? Because if we know the gunas of everything that is around us, we can actually start manipulating these gunas. For example, if you are in a very cold climate, we know that the cold climate has cold guna, right? And this cold guna, or in Sanskrit we call shita guna, can actually exert a shita quality, a cold quality on our body, and we will start freezing. So then what we need to do is to counteract against this quality. Therefore, we need to build up a fire right? So that the fire has hot guna, a heating guna, which can work against the cold, the shita guna, right? So it became all the more easy. We understood how to use these qualities, how to use these forces of nature, the elements of nature to our benefit. But the problem was this: if you look at these qualities in the nature, it's not actually very simple because there are many. If you look at the forces of nature, they are innumerable. The same way, the qualities in all of these elements are innumerable, and you might even find more than one qualities in many of these elements. For example, if you take a cold climate, it's not just cold, right? There is the cold wind, there is low temperature, there is dampness. How do you measure all of this together? So if you look at it, there is lightness, there is stickiness, there is unctuousness, cold, soil rough. There are many qualities. How do you actually interpret all of these qualities together? So the Vaisheshika, the Nyaya, and the Sankhya Darshanas, or the philosophies of the Orient, also face the same question. How do you actually reconcile all of these qualities together and understand the inner workings of the nature? How do you do that? Because we are trying to understand at the base, we are trying to understand our own existence, right? So if you can't actually reconcile all of this, how do you understand the very fabric of time and space and our existence? So what they did, the Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, what they did is they made a classification. The Acharyas made a classification. They divided these qualities into 5 categories, right? Into 5 categories. And then they said, if you look at every object in this universe, they will fall within these 5 categories of qualities. Or rather, they said, all of these objects in this world, everything that you can see, perceive, are actually made with these 5 units of classification. And they called that theory the Pancha Mahabhuta Siddhanta, right? The Pancha Mahabhuta Siddhanta. And they said there are 5 elements, or there is 5 classifications possible within these qualities. And they said there are elements which are of earth nature. There are elements which are of water nature. There are elements that of fire nature. There are elements that of air nature. And there are elements that of ether nature. So in Sanskrit, they go as Prithvi, Up, Tejo, Vayu, and Akasha. And thus came the 5-point classification of the entire universe, of the entire gunas as such, because it came through the gunas, right? And thus a 5-point classification came into being, and that made things very easy. Because if you think of it, everything that was heavy would fall into the earth element or the earth classification. Everything that was moving, which was able to flow, would fall into the water element classification. Everything that was able to transform, right, which is the strength of fire, would fall into the fire element. Everything which was able to move, which is light, which is not heavy, which is quite opposite to that of the earth element, would fall into the air. And everything that occupies space would fall into the ether element. So thus came the Pancha Mahabhuta principle. So if you look at it, it's actually a way of classifying things. It is also a way of understanding that everything in this universe is actually made with elements which actually represent these qualities. Or basically, all these qualities that we see around in nature can be effectively divided and categorized into these 5 elements. So thus came in the 5-point classification. Now, it became all the more easy for us because it became easy to understand the manipulation or how to apply these qualities for our own benefit, right? For example, you get an illness. For example, let's say if somebody ate a very heavy meal. So we would say, okay, you have eaten a very heavy meal and you're feeling heavy. So that means the earth element in your body has gone up, right? So to counteract, what you need to do is you need to increase the lightness, right? The opposite of heaviness is lightness. So you need to increase that light element, the lightness of this. And therefore, we can use an element or an object which falls into the category of air. Simple, right? It became very simple. So for the earth, you need to act with an opposite nature element, which is air. So that became all the more easier because there was a number of elements earlier, qualities earlier, which we need to consider before we apply something to our benefit. Now, since it fall into a classification of 5 categories, we can apply on a categorical basis. That became all the more simple. Now, the problem was, even with the Pancha Mahabhuta classification, when we adopted that into medicine, when Ayurveda adopted this Pancha Mahabhuta principle from the Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika into medicine, the problem was this. When we look at illnesses, each illness would have multiple symptoms, and those symptoms vary from person to person. So we doctors say that there is nothing called as a textbook symptom, or it's actually very rare to see a textbook case. It's because textbooks are just an ideal normal or an ideal way of saying cardinal features. The actual disease, the symptoms might vary by leaps and bounds. And that is true in any case and depending on the individual. So no two individuals might even have the same way of expressing the same illness. So it becomes difficult then to understand these qualities through Pancha Mahabhutas because there are 5 classifications and the permutation and combinations are also large. Now, it becomes all the more difficult when you're trying to apply a quality. For example, let's say you have to, in the same example that we discussed before, you have to give somebody who is feeling heavy because of a heavy meal, something which belongs to an air element. Now, the air element actually has to represent lightness. There are innumerable dravyas which has lightness. So how do you choose one from this a huge list of air elements? How do you actually choose? What is your criteria to choose an air element? So again, the permutation and combinations are huge. So what Ayurveda did, it created its own funnel. It created a further one step more easier classification of these gunas. So from 5-point classification, from a universe of gunas, we got the 5-point classification, which is the Pancha Mahabhuta principle. And from that, Ayurveda further funneled it down. And then we brought up a 3-point classification, right? We classified all of these gunas into 3 boxes. Right? So we classified the dry, coarse, light, cold, rough, subtle, and mobile into vata, smooth, sharp, hot, light, fluid, flowing, and liquid into pitta. And we classified anxious, cold, heavy, slow, fine, sticky, and stable into kapha. So we made 3 boxes. We filled these 3 boxes with 3 sets of gunas, and we called them, Ayurveda called them the vata, pitta, and kapha. Now the things become a bit more simple, right? For example, our rogi or the person who is actually approached us is feeling heavy, and also he might be also feeling slow. So we can say that, okay, he's having a kapha increase. And then we can actually choose, we can understand that he would need something which is opposite of heavy and slow, which would be light and fast or sharp. So we need something which actually qualifies in both categories of vata and pitta. I hope you guys I'm making sense to you guys. So if the rogi is feeling heavy and slow, we need something opposite of it. So opposite of heavy is light, opposite of slowness is sharpness, right? Sharpness is quick acting. So you need something which is quick acting and something which is light. If you look at that category, which is light and sharp, those qualities are in the vata box and in the pitta box. Therefore, we need a herb, a substance which we can prescribe to this rogi, which would fall in the Vata Pitta category. So the list actually then narrows down. Okay, the list actually narrows down. So we might end up choosing a ginger tea for actually giving this rogi, because ginger at the same time is light and it is also sharp. So that makes our manipulation or fixing the problem much more easier. Much more easier. So that's how Ayurveda has adopted the concept of qualities from the Nyaya, Sankhya, Vaisheshika into its own abode. While adopting these qualities, Ayurveda has made its own changes. It's not that Ayurveda has adopted qualities directly out of the Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika. It has made its own changes. For example, if you consider a quality, right? If you consider a quality, let's say hot, if you take a scale and you plot the hotness of the scale at one end and coldness of that scale at the other end, it's always relative. There is no middle point. For example, 5 points to the right of the scale would be still cold, but compared to the point that it is much more hotter, because the qualities are related. Then how do you reconcile that? The way to reconcile that in Ayurveda is by actually assessing the functions that the quality do. So the qualities are thus deduced out of the functions that it does. Okay, so a universe full of qualities, and we brought it down to a 5-point classification. The Pancha Mahabhutas, actually the Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika did, and then Ayurveda adopted that, but it was not working very well. So it further narrowed it down into Vata, Pitta, Kapha, into 3 boxes of qualities. So gunas does certain functions, and we classified these gunas into Pancha Mahabhutas, and from Pancha Mahabhutas into the 3 doshas, right? So I talked about a lack of perspective here. I'm trying to give you a way of perspective, how the thought process might have been. I agree that this is a speculation, but this is, I'm sure, is one of the way through which this thought process have flowed and actually wrought from the gunas to the 3 doshas. Okay, talking about the perspective, if you're starting Ayurveda, to study Ayurveda, one of the favorite entry point for Ayurveda for almost all the students is Ashtanga Hridaya. And Ashtanga Hridaya actually presents the Tridosha principle without much drama. I would say the lack of drama actually gives the most dramatic entry for the Tridoshas in Ashtanga Hridaya. So I would propose that we start our discussion about the Tridosha principle from Vagpada. Okay. So the Tridosha principle. So this is the sloka, perhaps one of the most famous sloka, piece of sloka in whole of Ayurveda, which is studied and appreciated and dissected down by many healers, Vaidyas, and students who study it. Vayu pittam kapascheti trayodosha samasataha vikrita deham knantite vartayanticha. Okay, let me read it once more. Vayu pittam kapascheti trayodosha samasataha vikritam deham knantite vartayanticha. Okay, Vayu pittam kapascheti trayodosha samasataha vikrita deham knantite vartayanticha. So the most famous sloka of whole of Ayurveda. So what does the sloka says? The sloka says, when if you read Ashtanga Hridaya, if you have an English translation of Ashtanga Hridaya, if you read Ashtanga Hridaya from the start, it starts with the first chapter, the Aishkamiyam. It started with the sloka that we chanted at the start of this session, the Ragadirogan. Then it goes on talking about the origin of Ayurveda. Then after a few slokas, you are presented with this sloka. There is no introduction. There is no talk of what a dosha is, because it's presented saying that there are 3 doshas. Vayu, Pitta, and Kapha. There are 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. no explanation about what a dosha is, no introduction about how this theory came into being, right? Because how this theory of the dosha came into being is not in the Ashtanga Hridaya, it's in somewhere else. Because it actually came from the qualities, it came from the gunas. That story of the evolution is not there. So that is one reason why most of the students find it very difficult to actually grasp the Tridosha principle, because they lack that perspective. Because that perspective is not just there. Because it's actually in this Sankhya, Nyaya, and Vaisheshika, where the ancient philosophers of the Orient have set out to understand the very nature of existence. Right? So that's how it's, the perspective is not there in Ashtanga there, but it is in Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika. Anyway, since this is the beginning of the Tridosha principle, this is what we have, this is what Vakpada has told us, hey, this is how we start studying Ayurveda. Let's study with this and let's see what we can learn from this particular piece of sloka. So, Vayu, Pitta, Kapascheti, Trayodosha, Samasata. So, Trayodosha, Vayu, Pitta, Kapamcha. There are 3 doshas. They are Vayu, Pitta, Kapam. So, there is actually something quite interesting in here. So, when we say, let's say, there's Karthik, Belvir, and Erika, when we say 3 names, do we have to still say these 3 people? It's understood, right? When we say 3 names, Vayu, Pitta, and Kapha, it is understood that they are 3. Then why Vakpada has said Trayodosha? He has emphasized that there are only 3 doshas. There are 3 doshas. There are Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Why is that? You have already named it, Vayu, Pitta, Kapha. We can only see 3 names. And why is that then you use the word Trayo? Then there are also some interesting questions about this sloka. For example, the end word of this sloka is Samasataha. Samasataha. Samasata in Sanskrit means in short. In short. So he says, in short, comprehensively, there are 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So why is that? If it's not in short, if it's not comprehensive, let's say if you're going on a very detailed way, are there more doshas? Are we talking about more doshas? Are more doshas possible? Maybe, because we just saw that doshas are essentially a classification of gunas, right? Can we actually make more classification? Is that possible? So why Acharya has given the number 3, Trayo, right? Trayo, actually the English word 3 actually came from the Sanskrit word Trayo, 3. Or even the same word 3 is also in Sanskrit. So why he has given the word Trayo is he's actually giving us an ultimatum. He's saying that the number of doshas are not 2, right? They're not 2, they're not 4, they're 3. Because you're going to see different iterations of these doshas. You're going to see different iterations of these doshas in the coming chapters. In whole of Ayurveda, if you just actually observe the universe around you, you're going to see many iterations of these doshas. Why? Because think of it. If your cold climate is increasing, right? If the cold climate is increasing, that becomes quite unfavorable. So the cold quality increases. Then you would say the cold quality which belongs to both Vata and Kapha, you can say the Vata and Kapha are increasing. Right? The Vata and Kapha are increasing. So they have an increased state. And if there is no hot quality at all, you could say the Pitta is decreasing. So when Vata and Kapha is increasing, then the Pitta is decreasing. So which means the doshas can actually increase and decrease depending on the qualities which they represent, increase or decrease, right? When the qualities which represents these doshas increase or decrease, we could say the doshas are also increasing or decreasing. For example, we just see the qualities again. If in a climate, if the cold quality is increasing, we could say the kapha or the vata is increasing, because vata and kapha both represent cold qualities. How would they differ? The kapha is unctuous and cold, right? It is sticky and cold, whereas vata is dry and cold. If the dry and cold elements of a particular season is increasing, we could just say, oh, the vata is increasing, right? It makes the communication much more easier. If we could see that in a certain temperature, the heat, the hot nature is increasing, we could just say the pitta is increasing. If we can see that the heaviness and coldness of the air is increasing during winter, we could just say the kapha is increasing. The same principle can be applied to the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe in, for every natural element there is. Therefore, we can actually communicate in terms of vata, pitta, kapha, that it is either increasing or decreasing depending on the increase or decrease of those qualities. Right? And then Vakvada says in the sloka, vata, pitta, kaphasyeri trayodosha samasata vikrita avikritam deham. What is vikrita and avikrita? So there are two states possible for these qualities. Either they can remain favorable to us, that which we call as a balanced state, when the cold of the winter is optimal, when the heat of the summer is optimal, when the rainfall is optimal, when the kind of the food that we eat is optimal with the right qualities, which are all favorable to us, we call it the samavastha, or the balanced state. In that balanced state, right? In that balanced state, it gives us health. It helps maintain health. Vikrita, avikrita, gnanti te vartayanticha. But if it is not sama, if it is not balanced, that will actually cause illness, that will hurt our body. So avikrita, gnanti. The word gnanti means to hurt, to harm. If these doshas are not optimal, they are not in the samavastha, if they are not balanced, right? They are not balanced, when they are not in the samavastha, when they are not favorable, it causes illnesses, it hurts our body, it harms our body. When they are avikrita, vikrita means vitiated, avikrita, non-vitiated. When they are non-vitiated, which is the samavastha, then we feel health. So there are different variations possible for these dosha. They can increase, they can decrease, or they can be at the samavastha, they can be at the balance. So what would I say? The number 3, because there are only 3 doshas. There are only vata, pitta, kapha. You're going to interact, you're going to meet with a lot of iterations of these doshas in the universe. You're going to see an increased vata, like too windy of a climate, too dry of a food, too dry of a place. You're going to meet too much pitta, like in a desert place, like a food which is so hot, so spicy, or climate which is a harsh summer. You're going to meet increased and decreased kapha. You might see all of these, you might encounter with all these states of doshas, but the doshas are only 3. The doshas are only 3. These are the increased, decreased, and the samavastha. All these are only states of these doshas, different layers of these doshas, different avastha, different states of this dosha. But doshas are only 3. They are vata, pitta, and kapha. So he's using the number 3, he's pressing on the number 3 to say to us that doshas are not 2, they are not 4, but they are 3. So these kind of statements in our textbooks are often called as a pratigna. A pratigna, it's kind of a categorical statement which says this is how it is. Okay, he is laying it down. He's saying in this science, in Ayurveda, there are only 3 doshas, Vayu, Pitta, Kapha. Okay, this is what it is. This you should remember. You should not forget this. There are 3 doshas, Vayu, Pitta, Kapha. Okay, and that's why the number 3 is important. Then, as I said, there is actually no indication of Vayu, Pitta, Kapha, or the dosha, the word dosha here. What does all this actually mean? How does these came into being? These words came into being, right? So we are talking about the origin of these words. So the topic of the day itself is the origins. the deep dive. So how did these names originate? So if you look at the word dosha itself, a very interesting definition that you're going to come across is that doshan means dushanat iti dosha, which actually means that which vitiates, right? So what is vitiation? Vitiation is when these doshas are not in balance, they are in unfavorable condition, they are either increased, they are decreased. This is what we call as a vitiation. There is also another explanation in Ashtanga Hridayam Sangraham, which is also from the same lineage of Vagpada, which says doshana swabhavad iti dosha. Doshana, doshaha, doshana swabhavad. Doshas are something which also vitiate others. So this classification that we just made of these qualities, they vitiate themselves because these qualities can increase or decrease in the natural elements, but also they can vitiate something else as well. So what is this something else? What are these others that this vitiates? So we'll come to that in the successive sessions. But again, we need to understand doshas can vitiate themselves and they can vitiate something else as well. So it vitiates itself and it can vitiate others as well. So now, if we take the example of our human body also have certain qualities. Depending on the qualities outside our body, it can affect our qualities inside our body and can either affect to actually cause an increase or decrease, which will result in illnesses, which will result in vitiation. So it can either increase or decrease, right? So the qualities inside our body can also increase or decrease. Then we say the doshas, which are representing these qualities, would increase or would decrease. Right? So doshas are actually that which vitiates and that vitiate others. Very interestingly, there is another very unconventional definition of doshas, which I actually came into understanding very recently. Dosha, the sound dosha in Sanskrit can be derived from another word which we call as dos. Dos actually means hands. So what are the function of the hands? Hands regulate, hands control. So doshas are something which controls and they regulate. So doshas are something that which vitiates others and it regulates. Now we might have a curiosity why these are named as doshas. So when you make a classification and that about qualities, can't we find some very pleasant names? Why we have to name something like that which vitiates? Right? It feels like we're talking about we're finding a bit of negativism here. It's not unnoticed, right? Even when you look at the sloka, Vagpada is talking about Vikrita Avikritam Deham. He's talking about vitiation in the first place. He starts with Vikrita, vitiation, then Avikrita in the second line. So why so much negativism? Why that Vagpada is giving so much importance to this negative feeling of this concept? That is because he wants us to understand doshas can actually vitiate with a very less effort, but it takes a huge effort to actually maintain them in the balance. Because if you look around you, you look around the nature, there are innumerable number of qualities available, and all these qualities at the same time simultaneously can interact with our human body and can throw us off the balance. It can throw away the balance of the qualities, aka the balance of doshas in the body. It's very easy to happen. But to keep them in balance needs a certain amount of effect. So it is very easy to get thrown off balance. But to maintain that balance, it takes a lot of effort. And it is because of that particular reason that Vagpada has used Vikrita in the first place. And that particular reason is why Ayurveda is using the name dosha, dushanat iti dosha, that which vitiates, because it has to emphasize that this is very easy to get vitiated. We need to be careful. It is very easy to lose our health. It is very easy for the elements around our world, the nature, the natural forces, to throw us off the balance, because you are interacting, even though you don't acknowledge, even though we are not aware, with a huge number of natural elements at any single point of time, be the air that we breathe in, the food that we eat, the kind of water we drink, the geography that we live in, the season that we get exposed to. Practically, they are infinite. Therefore, it is very easy for these qualities to vitiate. Therefore, when they categorized, when the Ayurveda artists categorized them, they gave the name doshas. Okay, they gave the name doshas into it. So dosha means dushna sabhava iti dosha, and dushna sabhava, it will vitiate and it will vitiate others as well. I think we are almost at the end of the time that we are in. I think we need to wrap up for the questions. I've planned for a bit more. Erica,
Yes.
shall we go for the questions?
Yeah, for sure. I'll see who's in the chat. If somebody would like to actually speak, you can unmute your audio and put up your hand, and you'll get your turn. So I see there's a question. Can doshas be affected by our mental states?
Okay, so yeah, I see the chat. So let me start from the beginning. There's a question about that. What is samasata means? Okay, samasata means in short, comprehensively. In short or comprehensively. Okay. Can doshas be affected by our mental states? Yes, the answer is yes. Ayurveda considers that the doshas can be affected by our mental states as well. So the answer is yes. Say emotional state, yes. Okay, I don't see any more questions.
We have 5 minutes left if somebody has a question. Oh, there's a hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, Belvir, you can open, yeah, there you go. You can turn your video on if you'd like also.
Hello.
Hello.
Ayurveda, 1 minute. Ayurveda study in Canada, any institute in Canada? आयुर्वेदा की कोई स्टडी इंस्टीट्यूट है मतलब कनाडा में?
Mr. Balveer, there is a few institute. We can send you later the information about Ayurvedic school in Canada. Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute. आयुर्वेदा में मतलब रोमेटिक आर्थराइटिस आर फैक्टर जिसको है, इसका कोई हल है?
Do you understand?
आयुर्वेदा में भी है और आप में भी है। हल हर जो भी सवाल होता है उसके सभी के हल होते ही हैं। तो आप ऐसे करें कि आप बाद में बात करें हमारे साथ।
Can you please speak English, Neelam?
Because he doesn't understand English.
Oh, okay.
No English, no problem.
Okay.
Broken
That's
English.
okay, sir. Okay.
Balveerji, we can call you and we can take your question later regarding your concern. Thank you.
Deepika, you go ahead, please. If you'd like to turn your video on, please do.
Hi, thanks Karthik, Dr. Karthik, for your informative seminar. It was really nice. Just wanted to ask that from childhood, I'm listening about 3 doshas. This is Vata, Pitta and Kapha because I was born and brought up in India. So, but it was very confusing always for me. Just wanted to ask you that since you said that it's been affected by our emotional states, like when we are feeling very angry, or when we are feeling very like depressed, it can affect you. But then when, because mental states after say 1 hour, our mental states again change, right? So what happened to the doshas at that time? They again change or they stay in that state and then it creates the problem afterwards, because the health problem I'm talking about.
It actually does. See, unlike that we tend to believe, these doshas are quite dynamic, right? It's not just the vata, not just the pitta, all these qualities are quite dynamic. They change. It's the same way, for example, like we are exposed to a certain climate and the climate changes after 5 minutes, it would have an effect on our body, right? The same way, even the mind would have an effect on the Tridoshas as well, or the Tridoshas, the qualities of the body as well. Ayurveda has a variety of views on this. For example, Vakpada himself has considered that the Tridosha principle is enough for the mind, but he also has added 2 other doshas for the mind specifically. So the sloka goes, Tesham kaya mano bhedat adhishtanam abhidvita. So he says there are 2 seats for all the illnesses, for all the imbalances. One is kaya, the body, the other one is manas, the mind. And in the very adjacent line, he goes on to say, Rajas tamasa, Rajas and tamas, manaso daucha dosha udahrito. There is said, so what is saying? I am saying, he's saying, I am not saying, but there are opinions that other than these 3 doshas, the vata, pitta, kapha, there are 2 other doshas specifically for the mind, Rajas and tamas, right? Rajas and tamas. Dosha udahrito. It is being said there are 2 more doshas for the mind, which is Rajas and tamas. So yes, if it changes, when these doshas changes, when your emotional state changes, they can have the reflections on the overall stability of the body as well, and these doshas change, and it does affect our equilibrium.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Now, my question going forward was,
Go ahead.
as our mental states come back to the normal states, like I was feeling angry 1 hour before because my kid something do very obnoxious, right? So now after 1 hour, I'm feeling okay, that we settle, we talk about, okay, so these things need to be changed properly and this and that. Now my mental state has come back to the normal one because my son understood what I wanted to say to him, right? Just giving an example, right? So
I got you. Yeah.
So in this case,
would the physical
changes has been made.
Would come down is the question, right?
Yes.
Would the physical
The doshas, they have been affected by that when I was angry or when my emotions were very high up. Now I have come back to my normal self. So within 1 hour, is it going to affect a lot? Or when I make it a practice that I'm getting angry very fast, then only it will show the effect on my health. Like when it's become a repeated kind of situation, that I'm going into that situation again and again and again, then it will affect me more. Or if it's only just one time I go up in emotional state, or if I'm depressed, suppose I fail in my examination, so I go depressed, and then after I pass my examination, after say 6 months again, I give my examination and I passed, right? So, and now my state is again, but something has been wronged already. So I need to work on it, or it will come back on its own because my body and mental state has changed. My question was that.
Okay, thank you. Let me answer that. So it has to be seen from the perspective of another concept, which is called as the bala, or strength. So what is strength in Ayurveda? It actually has two aspects of it. The strength is one, the ability of the body to resist an imbalance. And the second aspect is the ability of the body to endure, to persevere through an imbalance. Let's suppose that you have a mental agony, a mental situation, which actually is throwing your Tridoshas out of the balance, right? And after an hour, that mental agony is over. Like you said, you pass an exam and you're back in track. Your mind is back in track. But it is not necessary. The damage which has already been caused by your mental agony is not necessarily repaired. The good thing is that the cause which created the effect is gone now. So there is no more cause right now. So there is no more chance of the effect. But the effect that has been already created might exist, or the body will try to actually repair that effect, that damaged problem, right? The damaged issue. So a repeated trauma, a repeated cause, a repeated mental agony can throw these Tridoshas out of balance, and the extent of damage would be more. While as if your body has strength, right? If it can endure, it can resist that change, there won't be much of the damage. But again, anyway, if your body does not have strength, let's assume that, let's say that we have somebody who does not have much of sattva guna, we'd say that, like the strength of the mind. And if the body strength is also less, and this person goes to an agony, which throws the Tridoshas out of balance, which leads to a physical issue. When the mental issue is solved, the physical issue which already has happened, we might need to do the repair to bring it back to normalcy. And if the body has much more strength, it has the strength to endure, it will try to bring it back to on its own. But at times we need to supplement health, right? Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Everyone's loving it, Dr. Kartik.
Thank you. I don't see any more
Let's
questions.
see if there's one in the chat box.
Sorry, I'm not seeing that.
No, I'm just
Can we-
looking to see if there was one.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There's a comment.
There are
no,
qualities
there's a
of the
question.
organs and the other things. Qualities.
Right, there's one question. Doshas are situated in our bodies. They get vitiated, but how do they vitiate others and what?
Okay, great question. So doshas are situated in our body. Yeah, it is one way of understanding it. Actually, doshas can be applied anywhere. As I told you, it's a categorization. It's a tool. It's a way of classifying qualities, right? And qualities exist everywhere. So in that aspect, you can apply the principle of Tridosha everywhere in your body, in the geography, in the places that you see, in the climate that you experience and everything. So I talked about like how we actually observe the universe and we understand the qualities, right? So when I said Vagpada never actually gave a perspective, what I want to say is he actually provided the perspective in a reverse order. So what he did, he actually gave the Tridosha principle, then he started demonstrating, applying these Tridoshas into all these natural elements. For example, after talking about Tridosha, he goes on to say, you can apply Tridoshas to our process of digestion, something which is so subtle, right? And we can understand the process of digestion through Tridoshas. Then Vagpada goes on to say, it's not just digestion, we can actually apply Tridoshas into geography, right? Into geography, you can actually classify geography using Tridosha principle. There are three kinds of geography according to, if you classify using Tridosha, there is something called as Jangala, which is an arid place. Jangalam Vada Bhuishtam, Anupam to Kapholpanam. There is Anupa, which is a damp, cold, full of water bodies kind of place. And there is also Samam, Sadharana, a mix of both. So then he applies Tridosha to even the geography. Then he applies it to seasons and call it ritus. So you can apply Tridoshas to everything. So doshas are seated in our body. That is one way of understanding. Doshas are everywhere. We can apply Tridosha principle everywhere. When they get vitiated, means they can get vitiated at one place in our body or in the nature. For example, when there is a summer which is particularly very hot, like the hot flashes, and we have to understand that the pitta quality of that summer has increased, right? It is out of regulation. So then we can understand that pitta has gone vitiated in the nature. So this is the topic of our next session actually. How do we understand Tridosha principles even in the universe, not just in our body? So they get vitiated, but how do they vitiate others? To understand that, we need to understand there is no others. So that's actually kind of a revelation. I just wanted to keep it as suspense for the other class. Since you asked, there is no others. The others is for us to understand, to us to categorize, and us to study different objects so that it's easy for us to understand. Tridoshas pervades everything. You can actually apply Tridoshas to anything and everything. So when we say it vitiates and keeps on spreading. That is the actual way of saying that. Okay, I hope that answered that. Definitely, we are going to take this as a discussion in the next session as well. Thank you.
All right, our time is up. Thank you, Dr. Kartik. You did an awesome job. Everybody loved it. I saw so many wonderful comments. I hope you had a good look at them. And so we will do our next session on September the 16th at the same time.
Thank you.
And Dr. Kartik will just expand on the Tridosic Theory and give you more explanation. So, as I said in the beginning, there's a lot of misunderstanding on the internet about Ayurveda. And the two of us kind of brainstormed a little bit, and Dr. Kartik came up with this wonderful presentation in terms of getting us to understand. So if you can join all three of our series, and if you're a practitioner and would like to join our fourth one, you're very welcome to. So thank you very much. And if you haven't joined the Ayurvedic Association of Canada, please do. You can join for as little as $50. Neelam or Paul, would you guys like to say something before we say good evening? No? Okay, thank you. You're amazing. Thank you everyone for joining us. And this series will be on our YouTube channel over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to wait until we do the entire series and then I'll upload it onto YouTube. And for the gentleman that asked about courses, you can email the Ayurvedic Association of Canada. There's not really a lot of schools in Canada. Most of the schools are in the US, but we can answer your questions for sure. And thank you. You guys have something to say?
Thank you, Dr. Kartik.
Thank you, Dr. Kartik.
You
Thank
can
you,
you can unmute yourself and everybody can say thank you if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And he got up and he's in India. He got up at 4:30, so we really need to thank him a lot.
That's a Brahma Muhurat. That's the best time to study.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Good night,
Kartik.
everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you, Dr. Kartik.
Thank you.
See you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.